Hello, today I'm going to talk a bit about ethics and communication. Just a bit. It's a big topic. Actually, ethics is a big topic. It's its own field of study, and actually, communication is a big topic with its own field of study. And yet, here we are, we're trying to find the intersection of ethics and communication. So, in this video, I just want to talk a bit about how do we move from the macro to the micro, meaning how do we move from this idea of principles and claims of ethical standards that we have as a society or as a community, and then we want to move down to the micro piece of that, where is the decision making process or how we interact with others in our daily lives in conversation, right? What in those kind of interactions. And this is such a important topic because there are a lot of rules that we're trying to follow. We have layers and layers of rules from that are pragmatic rules of context. Pragmatic rules means the context of where we are. So every environment we're in, whether we're in a classroom in school or we're in our home or whether we're in a religious sacred location, all of these come with different pragmatic rules of nonverbal and verbal behaviors that we bring to it. And then we have other layers of expectations on identity. And these expectations on identity are sometimes internal, meaning that we have our own identity expectations and how we know ourselves and how we want to show up in the world. But that's always kind of running into the expectations of others, whether it's in the dyad, in our families, or society, or in our workplaces. So we have all of that we're navigating as well. And when we think about how we're showing up in conversations with all of these layers and cultural pieces to it, we have to make decisions about the and about how we converse, how we show up, and we also have a lot of things that are coming at us at all times. So because of that, it's really hard to be completely present in a dialogue. And that's really what we're trying to understand this term. So we started out with really big ideas. Kant's categorical imperative. Is there a absolute right and wrong way to be in the world, or is it more nuanced? Does Kant give us room for nuance of context? And then there is universalism or relativism. And these are huge ideas that people spend their whole career trying to define and understand. And we're just gliding by them like at supersonic speed through this term. And then I'm asking you, what does that have to do with your communication choices? And how do we show up? So if you feel like you're juggling a lot of ideas, yeah, that's kind of what's happening. So in this video, I really want to talk about the field of communication and the idea of communication competency. And then I want to look at what is actually happening in a conversation. And then our own identity of how do we know ourselves and build trust with others, or how are others but trying to build trust with us through communication. So when I talk about the idea of communication competency are these ideas about how are you effective and appropriate, and how do you adapt. So those are like the pillars of communication competency: being effective, appropriate, adaptive, and adaptability. And then there's a lot of branches on each one of those pillars. When we talk about effective, we're talking about that you have an idea of that you have a goal, or you have something that you are moving towards in the reason for or the purpose of a conversation event. So whether that is you're showing up at the coffee shop and you're talking to the barista on how you want your beverage made, that if you get the beverage at the end of that, we would say that you were effective in explaining what you needed and you got the drink, and the other person was effective in being able to listen and process how you were communicating that message, and the world aligned and you got the drink you wanted. So that's a really simple example, but these exist on all different kinds of tiers, from our romantic relationships to our supervisors, or if we are trying to communicate ideas to our family. The idea of being appropriate, our next big pillar, is this idea that we are in consideration and our responsibility to others. And this pillar really includes this idea of empathy or perception taking. And that's that idea that your way of perceiving things may not be the only way to perceive things, that there are other things that need to be considered. So if I'm being appropriate to the context, maybe I am a visitor in someone else's home. Maybe I've been invited over for dinner, and they have different cultural ways that they show up at a dinner that are different than my home and how dinner happens at my house. Uh, do I expect them to change for me? Or as a guest, is it more appropriate for me to figure out the pragmatic rules of that environment and then change the way I'm interacting to fit the culture I'm in? Right. So, and that's just one example. And I love the idea of be a guest at dinner, because families, even if they are part of the same greater culture or even some similar co-culture, the family home, the micro ethics of that home is to acknowledge that things can be different from one household to another, even, and so I think that is a really important example. And of course, it gets bigger and bigger, like if you're traveling to another country, or if you are in the group dynamics of a intercultural space, of how we adapt our communication. So now adapting is the third pillar. It comes right in on being effective, appropriate, and adapting. How do we adapt ourselves? And adaptation means that you have the cognitive ability to observe difference and change choices depending on what you are observing, in order to be socially accepted, or to be socially appropriate or empathetic to the circumstances you're in. And in fact, some of our television shows or fictional characters, especially comedy is really showing the inability sometimes of someone that they're missing one of these pillars, and the reactions of others. Sometimes it's set up as a comedic piece because the uncomfortableness of watching someone break a communication rule makes us laugh out of the uncomfortableness of it, or the fact that we do know the rule and we see a character not behaving the way they're supposed to. So effective, appropriate, and adapting. So I would say, hello, my audience. All of you probably have already a high level of communication competency. Just to get into college or to get a job and keep a job means you were effective, appropriate, and you adapted. And your relationships and the way that you socially exist in the world already demonstrate that you probably have a high level. So in this class, we want to kind of get into the weeds of what is happening in the nuances of conversations and how do we decide to show up. Sometimes we just walk away from a conversation going, why did I say that? Or why did that person say that? That really hurt my feelings or was offensive. And we're trying to navigate this very complex world, and recognizing the complexity of what's happening in a single communication event is what we're trying to do. So let's talk about that conversation and what's happening in a conversation. We're going to talk about the dyad. Now, in a dyad, there is different expectations of how you self-disclose. So self-disclosure is what I'm going to share with you, right? It's what I'm going to tell you, or, and we're usually on high alert with things, with what we decide to self-disclose, because of it's risky. It's risky, and we want to be accepted. We want to accept others. We are often unsure because of past experiences that we've had or stereotypes that we might be up against that include those risks of self-disclosing. We're not sure what will happen with the other person. So we have something we want to share, and we will usually, depending on how risky we feel the conversation is, we're going to start with things we already know are tried and true, to what we feel either safe sharing or feel low risk in sharing. And that's going to be different for everyone. Me saying, hello, my name is Sarah, and I'm the instructor for Calm 370. Feels pretty low risk thing to share. However, depending on the context of the situation, someone sharing back their name and their occupation or something else about their identity, depending on context, it might feel more risky. So we never want to presume about someone else's experience about what is risky and not risky. Saying my name for me may be unrisky right now, but for others, that might feel like a bigger risk. The benefits of self-disclosure, just to flip it over, is social acceptance, is the way that we are seen by others. And that is really the human experience. So when we are trying to decide who to self-disclose to, what we should self-disclose, when we should self-disclose, the ultimate benefit is the connection that we have with others. And that connection is what makes us human. We know that isolation or being disconnected from others for the human experience is a very painful experience. It is torturous to not be able to communicate with other people. In fact, isolation is a form of torture, and there is profound feelings of loneliness, when that is not necessarily forced, but we feel like we are so unsure, or the uncertainty of acceptance that we might choose to remove ourselves, and a profound feeling of loneliness can become overwhelming. So when we think about risks and benefits, this is, we're really weighing big things, even in the small moment of an interaction. So if I disclose something, I will expect reciprocity. So the way a communication event goes is I share something, you share something. I share something, you share something. And culturally, that will be different. How we share will be different from culture group to culture group. And I mean, these I'm not talking about culture groups of necessarily nationalities. I'm not talking about language barriers. I'm talking about the nuances of co-cultures, which even if we belong to the same culture, their co-cultures are the groups that exist under the umbrella of an identity. So within the United States, there are a multiplicity of co-culture groups. Sometimes some people call them subcultures, but in the social sciences, psychology, sociology, communication, anthropology, we call them co-cultures in order to not create hierarchies, which we could move into ethnocentrism if we're creating hierarchies that one culture is superior to another, and we don't want that ethnocentric language. So that's why we have this word co-culture instead of subculture. But they do exist in different dimensions, and your identity has many, many different co-culture identities. It can exist from the gender, the sexual orientation, music, regions that you live in, where you grew up, rural versus urban groups, East Coast, West Coast, Texas, the rest of the country, Alaska, the lower states, right? Like there's different ways that we identify ourselves. There's political identities and religious identities. Music is one of my favorite ones because music can really attach to our identity and how we show up or know ourselves through music is also different co-culture groups, and there's different codes with each of those. So when I talk about it's my turn to talk, your turn to talk, and how we show up with reciprocity, there's lots of nonverbal things that are happening and turn-taking signals that even if you belong in the same communication culture group, we can trip over each other and still run into snags or speed bumps that make a conversation difficult to traverse. But if things are going well and I'm getting reciprocity that feels like, and maybe you've been in a conversation like that where it just clicked along, and before you know it, you're like, wow, that was effortless. We usually are getting reciprocity and self-disclosure back that affirms our own experiences, that someone felt like they could self-disclose something that was risky, we self-disclose something that was risky, or we just got to know each other. That takes time to build. Sometimes we run into a moment in time where we really connect well in one communication event, but long-term relationships need a lot of breadth and depth to how we know each other and how we self-disclose. Actually, a friend of mine, just to give an example, I visited a friend on the East Coast, and I've known her since 2006 is the first time I met her. But this was because she recently moved to the East Coast, and I had to travel to see her. All our other interactions were like, let's go out for a drink, let's go get a cup of coffee. We shared an office for a little while at a workplace situation. But this was like, I'm going to stay in your apartment and we are going to go do things together. And we did touristy things. I went to her workplace. And it was for a week, I was really in her life for the first time, day and night. And it really created so much more breadth and depth to our relationship, and our conversations had so much more nuance to it than that popcorn kind of interactions that we've had for so long, for such a long period of time up till now. So I really appreciated this visit and the difference in the way our communication showed up. And so that really brings me to the last part of this small interaction with you about how we build trust and how we know ourselves through communication. And how do we, this is going to be different for all different kinds of people, but Aristotle's ethics of virtue is really about character and ethos. So ethos is different than ethics. Ethos is your identity. It's how do we know you? And on a scale of trust to distrust, your ethos is always changing and evolving through time, and we can keep it has a flexibility and to it where maybe you've had that experience where you were on like a roller coaster of ethos within a relationship, or someone else was where, wow, I really can trust this person, or can I, or I can, or can I, right? And maintaining a sense of virtue in our choices has a really delicate balance. So when we say someone has high ethos, that's based on their character. And when we talk about character or ethos, how ethos shows up as character, it's in their everyday choices. It because social media is also a presentation of identity. It also is the way that we post and repost also can impact our character, or the perception of others of our character, right? Because our ethos lives in the perception of others. And so it's our daily choices. It's the what we say. It's how we use language. It's our nonverbals that that get perceived by others and how they decide who we are. And it's how we're deciding about others. The other part of ethos is our trustworthiness. So our trustworthiness is this also based in all these decisions and presentations and the way we show up linguistically and non-verbally. But our trustworthiness is kind of connected to this idea of how do we care? How are we responsible? And the way that we can support others and how we are supportive of ourselves. So when I talk about trustworthiness, I will probably refer back to Brené Brown's braving list of trust. And when we talk about trust, we want to talk about, as an example, one of Brené Brown's example is this idea of the vault. So if someone tells us something, does it go in the vault, or do we then tell others? That will affect our trustworthiness over time. And that is how that gets exposed, because how do they know that we told other people or someone I'm going to tell you in confidence what this person told me in confidence, is when we are in conversation with others, we say, oh, you won't believe what someone said to me. This is a secret. Don't tell anybody. What really non-verbally starts happening is that person goes, I wonder if I could tell this person something, and are they going to go and tell others? And even though we are asking someone for their confidence, if we are revealing other people's secrets, then we diminish our trustworthiness perception to others. And we have to be careful of how we take information and how we take care of that vault. So Brené Brown also has other elements, and this is the way that we say yes and no. So just because someone wants to trust us with, I trust you to get this job done, Just saying yes does not mean that you're trustworthy. Actually, saying no can build more trust. If you say, oh my gosh, I wish I could do that for you, but my stack of to-do list is so big that I know that I may not be able to get to it, or I may not be able to do it with the quality it deserves, and I might have to say no. So this is really difficult to say no as a way of building trust because we often feel like just yes, 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 yes. For some people, saying yes is how we build trust. But actually saying no can actually build more trust and respect and build your virtue. And I want you to think about this idea of how yes and no show up for your ethos or for someone else's ethos? And do you allow other people to say no to you? Does that feel like an attack? Or do you respect another person's ability to create boundaries for themselves? It's an interesting ethical question. The other piece, the last piece, actually, there's two more pieces I want to talk about. That's competency and goodwill. When we talk about ethos, it's character, trustworthiness, competency, and goodwill. And competency is, do we know what we're talking about? Or if we don't know what we talk about, can we say, I don't know? And is it okay to say, I don't know? We have to think about, are we misleading people because we're trying to appear as if we have knowledge when we may not have it? And how does that show up? Goodwill is this idea of our choices being tied to helping others, or respect for others, or responsibility for others. And now sometimes we are very good at goodwill for me, for those that are mine, and those that are in my circle of who I think are worthy of my respect and responsibility. But when we belong to a pluralistic society, such as the United States or a global community, how do we extend goodwill to communities that maybe don't share the same identity as us? And how do we show up for responsibility for others, even if we don't know them one-on-one or personally, or if they're not in our family? So this is what, when Aristotle talks about virtue and being virtuous, uh, and this idea of character, how I want you to think about yourself as an individual. I want to think you to think about the people around you in your life and what is happening in the conversations that you see. I ask you often to give me examples from fictional characters, because the conversations in our stories are often held up in a way to be examples of ethics. And they don't always reflect what actually happens in real life, which entertainment is very heightened, but they're great ways to start isolating those points of what we think is good and bad, or right or wrong. All right, I look forward to your team meetings and hearing about your examples and experiences. Remember, we're focused on those interpersonal interactions, the conversation. Have a great week, and I hope everyone is doing well.